If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied the principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. My name is Valerie Francis. I am a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
And I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and award-winning author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper, and I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
On today's episode, Melanie pitched Sicario so that we can study the premise. This 2015 film was directed by Denis Villeneuve from a screenplay by Taylor Sheridan. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. As always, we would love it if you could help other writers find our show by simply leaving a rating and review. Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it from your phone. Just go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom, click the stars. It's that simple. And if you are watching us on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Okay, Melanie, the premise. How did you do with Sicario this week?
Well, do you know what? To be honest, I actually found this a little bit more challenging than I thought it was going to be. But I'll go into that in a minute as to why that was so. But just to recap on what a premise is. So the premise is a 1-sentence summary of your story. And this sounds very simple, but it's not, especially if you're in the throes of writing. In fact, I'll just let you in on a bit of a secret. I realized how difficult it is to write a premise when I expanded my research this week. And there are some pretty well-known writing gurus who discuss the premise in their work, but can't put a finger on what the premise needs. And they can't give a description, or they don't give a description. Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. They don't give a description of what a premise is or how it works. Now, I've collected 5 methods of creating a premise that I'm road testing this season, because my view is that if it's so important, and that is agreed by a lot of the experts, then I'm trying to find out what is the best approach and which method or which formula works the best. So I tried something a little different this week with Sicario compared to what I did last week. And this week I looked at the 1-line movie description to see if it worked as a premise or as a logline. Now, I took it from Wikipedia. So, it was, and it's on the description that I've got, or the sentence that I've got, is actually used on a lot of the copy to describe the movie and to summarize the movie's plot. And so this is what Wikipedia said. The film follows a principled FBI agent or special agent who is enlisted by a government task force to bring down the leader of a powerful and brutal Mexican drug cartel. Now, if we use John Truby's advice, which is what a premise is a simple combination of character, plot, and an event that starts the action, as well as needing a sense of the character and the outcome of the story, then I'll break it down and see if the 1-line description on Wikipedia for Sicario works. All right, so let's have a look at that. The protagonist, well, it's a principled FBI special agent, so tick. Then we have action and motivation, or this is the plot. And then we have enlisted by a government task force. Then we're meant to have an incident, and there's no incident. And then we get a sense. Does it have a sense of the ending? Well, I've put in here that we've got bring down the leader of a powerful and brutal Mexican drug cartel. Now, like I pointed out, there's no incident that starts the action, and there isn't any hint about the character's motivation other than she's principled. And we can probably guess that her principles are the motivation to bring down the drug cartel and the drug lord. So just from that very quick analysis, I would say that 1-line sentence is not a story premise. All right, so let's look at the first logline formula that I used last week. And that very simply was an inciting incident plus a protagonist plus action plus an antagonist. Using that in a sentence will give you a bit of a logline. All right, so the inciting incident, again, there's no inciting incident unless recruiting is considered the inciting incident, but I don't think that it is. Then we have the protagonist. Well, again, it's the principled FBI agent, so great. The action is to bring down the leader, and the antagonist, if we go by that description, is the brutal Mexican drug cartel. But I don't think that this is a good logline either, because again, it's missing the inciting incident, and I actually don't think that's what the story is truly about. All right, so let's dig a little deeper and use a slightly different method. Now, this week, I want to dive into an approach used by the writer Dwight V. Swain, and I found this in his book, Techniques of the Selling Writer. And I really like this method. So just like Truby's premise, Swain uses a concept called the lineup approach. And he designed it to give writers a tool or a method to test the strength or weakness of a story idea. Now, Swain proposes that there are 5 key elements in every solid commercial story, and this is why he calls it the lineup. Now, when arranged into a certain order, the 5 key elements give the writer a basic outline of the story so that the story becomes clear, or the point of the story and the direction of the story becomes clear. And he summarizes this on page 131 if you have a copy of the book. So now let's have a look at the 5 elements. So we have the character. Of course, this is the protagonist. This is the focal character. We have the situation, which is the trouble that forces the character to act. So it is an external state of affairs, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about the situation. The objective. And Swain makes a really good point that a character who wants nothing can't be in trouble or have conflict. So that's a really good point, and we can probably apply that across many areas of the fields that we've studied in previous episodes. But it doesn't matter if the protagonist succeeds, strives, or fails. They just need a motivation. So that's the objective. Then we have the opponent. So we need something for the protagonist or the character to go up against. So there needs to be friction or resistance in the struggle. And we need a disaster. So the protagonist must face something awful. And this either leads to the crisis or is the crisis. And the description that we use as we go through these, as we expand on these 5 key elements, must be concrete and as specific as possible. So we can see that Swain has given a fair bit of detail of what those 5 key elements are. The next bit that he goes on to give us is that those 5 elements make 2 sentences. So he states that there are no more than 2 sentences. He's very strict on this. And the guideline is that sentence 1 is a statement, which establishes the character, the situation, and the objective. And then sentence 2 is a question, which nails down the opponents and the disaster. And again, there's more description of this on pages 132 and 133. So using this framework that Swain gives us, this is how I see Sicario. So the character is FBI Special Agent Kate Mesa. The situation is that Kate is the lead of a squad tasked with finding drug cartel safe houses, and during a raid, her team finds decomposing bodies hidden in the walls of a house. And a booby trap in the shed on the property goes off and kills 2 of her team. So the objective: Kate wants a chance to take out the cartel responsible for the horrors that she's witnessed, especially the person at the top, and then she is invited to join a task force led by the FBI. Her opponent, Well, now this is where it gets really interesting and it gets really tricky for Kate. On the surface, the head of the Mexican cartel, Fausto Alcaron, is the opponent. But Kate is actually up against the FBI team lead, Matt Graver, and his mysterious offsider, Alejandro Gillick, who aren't telling her the truth about the task force's objective. So you can tell, like, I'm really excited already because this method is giving us a slightly different way to unpack the story compared to the other methods that I've talked about so far. The disaster. Kate realizes that the FBI are engaging in illegal means to replace Mexican drug lords with a single Colombian organization that they can control. So let's put this into 2 sentences, as Swain has said that we should. When principled FBI Special Agent Kate Mace's team raids a Mexican drug cartel's safe house and finds dead bodies hidden in the walls and a booby trap kills 2 of her team, she wants to find the drug lord and bring him to justice. Will she be able to maintain her principles when she discovers the FBI task force she joins is engaged in illegal and immoral methods to gain control of the cartels? Right, so that's what I've come up with. Now, it's not perfect, but I actually think it's pretty good for a first cut. Now, this is the first time that I've used Swain's method, and I have to say that I really like it as a tool to build a story's premise. And while I like Truby's loose formula because it forces writers to set a direction towards the ending, Swain's tool specifies the story's climax. And in doing so, this method makes the conflict in the story really clear. Now, Kate's morality isn't tested by the drug lords. It's actually tested by the other law enforcement agencies she's working with. These teams, with the approval of the government, engage in unethical methods of gaining influence, including hiring hitmen, and there is little care about the collateral damage that they cause. This is the point of highlighting that Kate is principled. So the conflict has to test her values and her morals. Kate and the task force want similar things, but their methods are the point of difference that test her. Kate's conflict is established by identifying that she is a principled agent. And it's easy to be principled against drug lords and cartels, but in this case, the premise or the story summary identifies that the greater conflict for Kate is when her own team, her own government, isn't as principled as she is. In fact, they are morally black. So that's another way to unpack or look at the story and to create a story premise or guidelines for you at a very high level as a writer. And I'm actually a bit excited about that one. So that's I'm learning as you are as we go along and road test some of these methods that I've identified. All right, Valerie, how did you go with identifying the type of protagonist in Sicario?
Well, Melanie, like you, I have to say this movie surprised me. I had to work on this one a bit this week because, like you, when I read, the little description about what this movie was about, first of all, the way they're marketing it isn't very accurate because it's not what you're getting. It sets up an expectation of one thing and you get something very different. So I was expecting one type of protagonist based on the marketing description in, my little iTunes account. But then I got a very different story and it threw me for a loop at first. It really did. Because Melanie, I admit I made the rookie mistake this week of trying to analyze the movie on a first viewing. I wasn't doing it consciously, but sometimes I have a hard time turning off the editor brain. So for anyone who's new to the show, Melanie and I have said this many times, and we'll say it many more times in the future. when you want to study a story, whether it's a book or a film or a TV show or a stage play, the very first thing you do is just read the book all the way through once. Just as a reader, not as a writer, not as an editor. There's no analysis. It's on the second and subsequent readings that you do your analysis and your study or your editing. Now, just saying that, I know makes a lot of writers balk because they just can't conceive in reading the book a second time when they've already read it once. But trust me, if you're willing to do the work, the rewards, your return on investment for that work is through the roof. It is really, really worth your time. Okay. So, Melanie, when I saw the type of movie you had chosen, I assumed that the protagonist would be a hero, but she isn't. She's an underdog. And it's not the typical representation of an underdog that we're used to seeing either. So typically, underdogs start out in the beginning of the story with all the cards stacked against them. And then at the end of the story, they triumph. And it's this triumph that gives the audience a sense of catharsis. But those are stories that have a quote unquote up ending. And by that, I mean stories with a positive ending. Sicario has a down ending. It's a big downer of an ending. And that means that Kate starts the story with the cards stacked against her as an underdog, right? But at the end of the story, she's in an even less powerful situation. So there's more cards stacked against her. She starts low and she goes lower. So this is the typical arc of a status pathetic story for Kate. She is a weak protagonist at the beginning, and she tries to rise, but she fails. A typical underdog story, the kind that we're used to seeing, is a status sentimental story. So in other words, a story where the protagonist is weak at the beginning, but succeeds against all the odds. We love those stories. The status pathetic ones can be a bit of a downer, I'm not going to lie. So if we think in terms of genre or in terms of characters being constant or having an arc, generally speaking, a hero is a constant character and an underdog is a character with an arc. Now, will you find exceptions to that? Absolutely you will. Absolutely. I am speaking here in very broad strokes in order to give you a jumping off point as you continue with your own study of these topics, because story theory is pretty nebulous. It can be like trying to nail Jello to a wall sometimes. So what I find helpful for me, and I'm sharing this with you in the hope that you find it helpful for you, is to grab onto one concept and work with it as though it is fact at first. And then measure all of the stories that I read or watch, consume, against that idea as a fact to see what stands up, what doesn't stand up, how it changes, how it moves around. So if you start out with the premise that a hero is a constant character, then as you study your hero characters, you can see, well, this one is actually not a constant character. And here is how it influenced this particular story. Here's the genre that it was used in. But the hero as a constant character is a great jumping off point. Likewise, an underdog as a character with an arc is a great jumping off point. So none of this is carved in stone. I just want to give you something that you can hold on to as you do your own research. All right. With all that said, let's get into it. So really at its core, the protagonist types are all grounded in power and power dynamics. In other words, how much power does the protagonist have with respect to the other characters in the story? And how does your reader relate to that level of power? With that in mind, let's take a look at Kate. The opening sequence, and Melanie, I'm going to say a lot of the stuff that you said as well, because we picked up, even though we did our own study, we picked up on exactly the same points yet again. So the opening sequence of this film gives the impression that Kate is a hero. And of course, that is what I was expecting. So I was just going with it for the opening little bit of the movie. Now, the filmmakers know, or at least I assume they know, all of this. And I think they're playing with this assumption that the audience is going to expect Kate to be a hero. Now, it could be a fluke, but I doubt it. Kate is presented as a quote, badass FBI agent. She's not completely without fear, but relative to the other characters in those opening scenes, she is relatively fearless. She seems like she's either the leader or at least one of the senior officers on the ground. And Melanie, you said that she was the leader. And that's what I had originally. I assumed as I was watching it the first time that she was the leader, and then I kind of backed off on that idea. So in a couple of minutes into the movie, then, after this opening, sequence where everything's getting blown up and people's limbs are being blown off their bodies, right after that, as she is handling that and reacting to that situation, we see her having difficulties here. There's a scene where she's in the shower and she's nearly in tears. She only cries once, and that's right at the end of the movie, but here at the beginning, she's very close to tears. And she has a bit of a head wound, and as she's cleaning the blood out of her hair, we can see her hands shaking quite dramatically. So we begin to realize that this character that we assumed was a hero may not be as tough as we first thought she was. Right after that, and this is still within the first 15 minutes of the movie, there's a scene where Kate is waiting outside a meeting room while her fate is being discussed by a bunch of men inside. Now, we don't know exactly who those men are. One of them is her boss. That we know because we were already introduced to him earlier in the movie, but we don't know who any of these other guys are. This is the first glimpse that we get of Kate as truly powerless, because the whole thing about her having trouble reacting to her teammates having their limbs blown off, that could simply be a character dimension being introduced. It's not that little bit in and of itself is not a clear enough indication that she is an underdog, but it's a clue, but not enough of a clue that we can draw a line directly from that to underdog. When Kate is sitting outside of that meeting room, she's sitting there with Reggie. She has no idea what's going on. And she even says that. Neither she nor Reggie know. But the fact that Kate is clueless here, now we're starting to get enough little bits of information that what we as the viewer are starting to wonder whether she is a hero or not. Now, it's not that heroes need to know everything all the time, right? At this point in the story, it's still possible that Kate might in fact be a hero type of protagonist. The men around the table are speaking highly of her, so it seems like, even though she's not in a power position at that moment, which remember is still very early in the film, she might still become a hero. If not right away, then certainly by the end of the story. There might still be a midpoint event of some sort that forces her to step up and become heroic. That ain't what happens, though. I'm sorry to say. So let's just look at key parts of the rest of the movie that drive home this idea that I have that Kate is in fact an underdog and not a hero. All right. First, Kate is a pawn. Okay. She is invited into this meeting room, and the men, and we still don't know who they are, begin to question her and what she knows about Manuel Diaz's operation. She does know some basic facts about his business operations, but that's all she knows. Like whatever was in the file, the FBI file, that's all she knows. Immediately, these men force Kate to admit that she does not know that Manuel had a brother or a cousin because it's not her department. So this is twice in the matter of a minute or two where Kate out loud is forced to admit ignorance as to what's going on around her. So the effect of this is to further weaken her. Now, eventually we find out that she's nothing more than a pawn in their game, but we don't know that yet. Also, Kate is quite passive. She's not entirely passive, but she is, I would say, primarily passive. She does not know why she's on the mission. She doesn't know who the team members are. She's told, I mean, she knows their names. She knows it's Matt and Alejandro. She's told that they are DOJ, and she is told that the mission is headed up by, this guy, Matt, who is the Josh Brolin character. And in this recruitment meeting, she's told one thing, but in reality, when she gets on the ground, the mission is not unfolding the way she expected or the way that missions are typically conducted. So she begins to ask questions. And basically, over and over and over, she's told, don't worry your pretty little head about it. Basically is what she's told. So 18 minutes into the movie, and that's a long time, okay, into this movie before she gets any sort of response at all. When she asks Matt for information, he tells her to simply observe. That's it. She is giving nothing to do. She just has to observe. So remain passive. Now, heroes are very active. They're active and proactive characters. Kate is passive. She also asks Alejandro if there's anything she should know about the mission, because as far as she knows, he's the expert on Mexican cartels. He tells her nothing, right? He also says basically, just keep your eyes open and observe. Now, the first thing that they do is go to visit Juarez. And again, Kate is passive. She sits in the car, and when things go sideways at 38 minutes in, Kate again questions Matt's actions, and all he says to her is, quote, just sponge up everything you see, learn, that's why you're here. Now, the other thing is that Kate is the only woman on the team. I think she might be the only woman in the whole movie. She is told nothing. She is given nothing to do. She's told that the men in charge are, quote, DOJ advisors and nothing more. She suspects that they are CIA, but she doesn't know for sure that they are. Every time she asks a question, like I said, she's dismissed. Her concerns are always brushed aside. Don't worry your pretty little head about it, is kind of the answer she gets over and over and over. Now, at this scene where the border crossing scene, where three groups of people are held back, Kate asks Matt what they're looking for. Like, again, why are we here? Why are we questioning these groups of people? Again, Matt says to her, just keep watching. But when Reggie, who at the beginning of the movie I thought was her underling, turns out he is her partner, so they're equals. When Reggie asks the same question, he gets an answer not only from Matt, but also from Alejandro. They tell him everything. They'll tell Reggie, a man, the information, but they won't tell Kate. So this puts Kate in the weakest position of all of the main characters and even most of the secondary characters. Because even the soldiers who are on the mission, we don't know their names. Not all of them have lines. They're just sort of a group of soldiers. Even they know what the real mission is. Kate's the only one who does not know. Even the viewer knows what the real mission is. And it takes a while for Kate to clue in that this is not what they told her it was in the beginning. So why is her gender relevant here? Well, because in this situation, she is physically much weaker and smaller than every other character in the film. Now, Emily Blunt is skinny, 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 right? She does not have a lot of muscle mass or muscle definition. She doesn't, in this movie as a character, display any particular physical prowess or physical strength or fighting skill. Like, she is not a Xena warrior princess type of character. She's diminutive. She's physically shorter and physically smaller than all of the other characters. And it's also relevant because with this particular group of super macho men, Women are not equals. The characters are very much falling along traditional, or perhaps I should say stereotypical, gender roles. Women are great for the office work, they're secretaries and so forth. And they're also great for lending an air of sophistication to the mission. And as it turns out, that is exactly why Kate is involved, to make the mission look legit and to sign off on the paperwork. At an hour and 20 minutes in, Matt says, quote, "The CIA can't operate within U.S. borders without a domestic agency attached. I told you you'd be useful. That's it. That is why you're here." And then at the end of the film, Alejandro forces Kate at gunpoint to sign a document certifying that the mission was conducted according to procedure. All right. I said that Kate was primarily passive, but not entirely passive. And the limited actions that she does take go sideways fast. At one point, she takes a decisive action when she goes into the bank and gets information about Diaz's accounts. She wants to build up a case against Diaz in a way that follows protocol. But Matt does nothing. He refuses to arrest Diaz. He overrules her immediately. He outranks her. So her decisive action amounts to nothing more than a waste of time, and actually to make a fool of her, to make her look silly. This infuriates her, like you would. And so she goes to her superior. This is Jennings, the character played by Victor Garber. But he does not back her up. He sides with Matt. And when Matt discovers this, Kate's position is even further weakened. Nobody in this movie, except possibly Reggie, is even in Kate's corner. And Reggie, even though he was able to get information out of Matt and Alejandro, information that Kate could not get, he's way outside the mission. So Kate is even less powerful than someone who isn't even involved in the mission. Kate also takes action when she chooses to follow Alejandro in the tunnel rather than stick with Matt and the other soldiers as she is ordered to do, right? That was her job, is to stay with Matt and the other guys, while Alejandro goes down a different tunnel and goes on his own mission. So she follows him because her spidey senses are tingling, and she knows that this is not all above board, and she wants to know what's going on. And she sees Alejandro with a gun to a Mexican police officer. And so she pulls her gun on Alejandro and orders him to move away from the cop. Now, in return, Alejandro shoots her without even pausing. Now, he does shoot her like in a Kevlar vest, so she is fine. And a few minutes later, Kate makes her way back through the tunnel, back to the main group where Matt and the other soldiers are. She tries to attack Matt, but it's almost a joke how weak she is against Matt. It's not like it takes 4 or 5 or 6 men to pull her off him. Matt, played by Josh Brolin, kind of just picks her up in one arm and carries her off while she's kicking and screaming. It looks like if you've ever been in a mall and a child's having a temper tantrum and the dad picks up the child, and while the mom finishes the shopping, the dad has the child under one arm and he's going out to the car. It looks like that. So in a final act of action and perhaps defiance, Kate goes, like, this is the very last scene of the whole movie. She goes out on her balcony and she pulls a gun on Alejandro. Now, this is right after he put a gun to her head and made her sign the document saying that this whole thing was above board. So Alejandro at this point is unarmed. He is down on the ground. She is up on a balcony with a gun. Now, in this situation, she should have all the power. Like if you have cats, if you ever observe cats, the more powerful cat is the one who's up higher. It's a power position, right? If you are physically higher, a throne is elevated so that the monarch is above everybody else. when you're higher up, you have the power, typically. If you've got a gun and the other person doesn't have a gun, you got the power. So Kate should be extremely powerful in this scene. In fact, she's completely powerless because Alejandro, who is walking away, stops, he turns, he looks up at her, and all he has to do is look at her, and she just withers. She can't do it. She can't shoot him. She is an absolute wreck, and he knows it. He knows that he is stronger, even unarmed, even from a lower position. So, all of this to say that as an underdog, Kate is in a lesser position, a weaker position than every single character in the story. She's also, quote unquote, lesser than the viewer because we tend to not be the least powerful person in every single situation all of the time. However, we have all been there where we've been in situations where, we are the underdogs. Like, we don't know what's going on. The cards are stacked against us. And it doesn't feel very good. We don't like it. That's why underdogs as main characters are so popular with readers and viewers. Like, we have tremendous empathy for underdogs. Like, they're real crowd pleasers because we know what it feels like. We've been there, and we always root for these underdogs, and we desperately want them to triumph because if they can triumph in their situation, then the next time we're in a situation where the cards are stacked against us, it gives us hope that, you know what, we just might triumph too. Unfortunately, Sicario is a down ending. So Kate does not triumph. She ends up in a much worse position at the end of the movie than she was at the beginning, and it is a total bummer. Oh, okay. I know that was a lot to take in. But that's what I've got to say about heroes and underdogs this week. Melanie, what are your final thoughts about Sicario?
All right. Well, I know that I'm using polished and edited movies to test the methods that I'm exploring this month, but it's still worthwhile so that I can learn how to construct a premise. And this exercise also demonstrates that general descriptions like the ones on Wikipedia or movie posters or any IMDb aren't good enough for writers. We need to understand the 4 story questions, but in addition to these, we need to have a sense of the ending of our story or the climax of the story. So we need to have a really good sense of our story if we want to come up with a good premise.
Well, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. For the power to write a best-selling story, visit storynerd.ca. To join my inner circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for more information about Melanie's books, visit melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory does not have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have lots of fun.